There's a commercial that's been on the TV for the last month or two. It's an interesting commercial. I have no idea what they're selling, but I remember the commercial vividly. So sometimes they make commercials that are so clever you forget what they're trying to sell, so it's counterproductive. In this commercial, it starts with you see a zombie in an office, and he's in a suit, and he's walking, and the lady comes up to him and says, "Oh, can I help you?" And all of a sudden he stops being a zombie, he talks like a normal person, and he says, "I see you have this policy that says for anybody, does that include somebody who's perhaps, not necessarily alive or dead, but undead?" And she says, "Oh, you're a zombie." And he goes, "Whoa, let's not go throwing labels on people." It's absolutely brilliant idea. And then of course his ear falls off and he hangs his head in shame and says, "I'm a zombie." And we think, oh, that's so silly. And that's a wonderful example of using absurdity to make a point, right? But I'm going to do the same for you now. Imagine this. Imagine that somebody came to you and they had cut themselves and it was horribly infected. You could see it, pus and green and all nastiness and all that. And you said, "Oh my gosh, let's get you to the doctor. You need to see somebody about that cut." And the person said, "Hey, hold on. It's okay. It's completely natural. That's how it's supposed to be. After all, I'm only human." Or maybe they came in and they looked all just pale and clammy and sweaty and moppy hair and said, "Do you have the flu?" And they're coughing and getting sick. And, "Oh, hey, hold on. I was made this way. It's just in my nature to be ill." You think, what's the matter with this person? What if you came and saw your friend and all of a sudden they had this big throbbing bulge coming off the side of their skull, some strange tumor. And you said, "Have you seen a doctor about that?" They said, "Hey, don't go judging me with your doctors and your labels and talk of tumors." We think if somebody did any one of those three things, we think that they were either profoundly ignorant about how the body functions or that they were profoundly deluded about what their state would be. We would think, why do you refuse to see a doctor? You're going to die if you don't take care of yourself. Makes sense, right? It would be an absurd situation. But isn't this exactly the same thing we do with spiritual things? We wouldn't do those things with physical bodily things, but we do them all the time, and we know people who do them all the time with spiritual aspects. I'm not spiritually ill. Don't judge me. Don't label me. Don't put me into your box, you religious person. But if we're understanding the state of what a human being is supposed to be by nature and what it means to be a spiritual being, then we see these sicknesses, we see these illnesses of soul and spirit, and we can't help but wonder, why aren't you seeing a spiritual doctor about that? Why aren't you bringing your woundedness and your illness to Jesus Christ? Now, there are some people who would say, pessimistically then, well, I can't really make a difference because it is in my nature to be spiritually ill. That is to say, I'm only human, and human nature is totally depraved, and human nature is inherently evil, and human nature is imperfect and sick, and therefore, what are you going to do? Too bad. And that's a pessimistic view that many hold, even many Christians hold. Or you could be completely on the other end of the spectrum, but in the same error. And that's to be completely materialistic and say, well, it's just a psychological disturbance maybe, or maybe they just haven't come to accept that they're different. Or maybe we shouldn't say anything because after all, it's just an alternative way of life. And therefore, it's just their nature. They were made that way. Both of these positions are profoundly deluded and ignorant, as much, if not more, than the type of absurd situations we talked about at the beginning. These are individuals who are spiritually ill or see spiritual illness as something natural or inherent to human nature. Christ in the Bible taught something radically different and profoundly optimistic. And that's really important to understand. First, recall that when he taught us to pray in the Our Father, or the Lord's Prayer, how does that prayer end? And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That's really important because it teaches us a couple things. First, that temptation is not natural, is not inherent to the human being, but comes from outside. And therefore we ask God to preserve us from it, to take it from us or take us away from temptation. And secondly, that it is not something that is just part of life and natural in and of itself, but in fact we're asking Him to deliver us from the evil one, which shows us that evil is something external to the human nature. Now you may say, evil one. When I say it, sometimes I say, just deliver us from evil, or people I know say, deliver us from evil. And you'll see some Bible translations in English say evil, and some will say evil one. I believe King James says evil one. That makes that big of a deal. But the reason why Orthodox Christians generally in their translations prefer the use of the term evil one is also very important. Because it establishes that evil does not kind of exist as an amorphous force with its own being. It's not like the dark side of the force that's just kind of coagulating out there. But that it is always inherently tied to the action or activity of somebody. An agent, if you will. An agent of evil, or an evil one. An evil doer. So evil is only a descriptor. It's not a noun. It's just an adjective, if you will. And so, the origins of evil come through the evil one, who's the devil, through his demons. And then, if we liken ourselves to the devil and his minions, and we practice his works, and we practice sin, then we become evil doers and hence evil. But it is always not part of our nature. It's part of our activity. It's part of the use, or misuse rather, of our human life, of our freedom, of our will, of our bodies, of our thoughts. And it's really important that we can make that distinction, brothers and sisters, because if we say that evil exists in and of itself, then we're basically saying that God, because nothing that exists was not created by God. So you're saying that God created evil. And that's a whole lot of problems, right? If you believe in a God who created not only good, but evil, then we don't have the biblical God there. That's not the biblical God. In fact, some of the saints have even a beautiful idea that they even say pray or have pity on the demons. Why? Because the demons even were created good by God. They were created as angels, beautiful beings, spiritual beings, ministers of flame, to serve. But instead, through the use of will that they were given, they fell and turned to evil through their own actions. But they themselves, even still, remain created by a good God and were created for good, in spite of the fact that they have fallen. So those saints have pities. And human beings likewise. While we are still in this body, we might fall, but we can also rise again. We can repent. We can change direction, we can return to God, we can accept the good, we can humble ourselves, and we can receive the grace of God, which enlightens and illumines us, and enlivens us. And after death, the good news is that humans can no longer sin. The bad news is, nor can they repent. They can only do both those things while in their bodies. So it's really important to understand then, this situation. Because Jesus came for one very important reason, and that was to free us from the power of evil in the form of the devil, death, and sin. 1 John 3, verse 8, the Holy Evangelist says, "For this purpose the Son of God was manifested." That is, He came in the flesh, He appeared among us. "For this purpose, that He might destroy the works of the devil." It's really important to understand that one of the primary, in fact, the primary mission of Christ in the Incarnation was to destroy the works of the devil, death and sin, and to free us from slavery to death and sin. And note that it says, destroy the works of the devil. God is not going to destroy the devil. What? He's not going to destroy the devil? Doesn't that bad guy get his comeuppance once and for all? Nope, he doesn't. He exists forever in the eternal flame. He exists forever in torment, in the abyss, as the demons in the gospel today were afraid. And that is why even the demons ask for pity from Christ when they know he is coming. They sense the judgment is at the door. Please don't send us into that abyss. They know that their life will continue. They won't be destroyed. They won't have an escape in death themselves. Wow. And so he shows mercy even on a legion of demons by giving them this temporary escape into the herd of swine. But they show that their fate is still sealed, which is why they are inherently self-destructive. They inherently bring violence to themselves and to that which they possess because of their choice for evil. And so the herd of swine cannot just simply go along and continue to be happy pigs. It goes insane, and it drives itself over the cliff and drowns itself. This is a powerful image of what exactly happens in us. It's a metaphor, if you will, for the human situation. When we become vessels of the evil one, when we accept the works of the devil so much in ourselves that we in fact become a dwelling place of the devil and his minions, it is contrary to our nature, and the inevitable result is self-destruction. Chaos, insanity, and self-destruction. So to have communions with the demons is not natural. Is not appropriate for human nature. Human nature, animal nature even, rebels against this invasion of an infectious alien being and tries to escape it, and tries to drive it out, and cannot. Even the pigs knew that they were sick and didn't deny it. So let us use the example perhaps of an infectious disease. We're talking about the demons and sin in general. We could talk about virus, bacteria, and then even a mutagen or a cancerous substance, because cancer is your own cells turning against you. It's the kind of a culmination of sickness, if you will. The Apostle Paul teaches us in Ephesians 6 that we are in a spiritual war that needs spiritual armor. Therefore, he says, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness, legions, you could say, of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. It's not against our own human nature that we're actually fighting, believe it or not. It's actually against the intrusion on our nature of something which is unnatural to it, which is demonic influence. The armor is like that protective suit that you see the CDC guys wear when they go into a hot zone, right? An infectious zone. And the primary way in which the demons attack us are through what the Greek fathers call logismi, or intrusive thoughts, ideas, images. If you were in our book study on Fridays, we were talking about this just a couple days ago. And what these are, all these are is like what is a virus? A virus is almost nothing more than a little piece of genetic coding in a shell, right? It's not even a complete strain, if you will. It's almost a semi-organism. And that's kind of how intrusive thoughts are. They're just little bits and pieces of data, an image, a memory, a smell, a sound, a wisp of gossip that you hear in the workplace, something you see on a billboard or on the magazine rack at the grocery store, a song, a little bit of a song you hear on the radio, a memory that just suddenly comes to you unbidden of something that happened to you before in your life, maybe something painful. These are all just little bits and pieces of data, sense data that comes to us. But the devil knows how to use those little bits of coding, if you will, to ignite a chain reaction within us that can cause us to become ill. And if the demon is able to do that and get it established, and it propagates itself within us, we start thinking over and over again about that idea, or we start obsessing about an image, and we keep going over the past, and we can't let go of these things, and we can't just let them flow through us. That's why they say when you get a virus, what? Drink a lot of water. Flush it out. It's going to pass through you. It's going to stink while it's there, but you'll get through it, right? Unless it's one of those killer viruses. And those happen too, spiritually. But if that continues to happen, you might up the ante to the next level of illness. We'll call it bacterial infection. Now, bacteria is a full organism and propagates itself and creates waste and poisons the organism in which it's found. This is what happens when this kind of sense data and logismi become well entrenched within us, well ensconced within us, and they take a life of their own within us. They become almost habitual thoughts. When our ideas, we begin to accept them as our own. Yeah, I am angry. Or yeah, I really would like to go do this or that or the other with this or that or the other person. Or that's just the way I'm made. We've actually given life to those ideas within ourselves, and now they're propagating at a rapid rate and directing us, and we're becoming very sick. And we're becoming really visible. Now, here's the good answer, though, the good news for you. What happens when you have bad bacteria in you? You can get antibiotics, right? But if you want to be really healthy, what do? You take probiotics, right? You start making sure that you have the good bacteria in your stomach, in your system. You go have your Greek yogurt, whatever. And you know what? That stuff works. Physically. Why shouldn't it work spiritually in the sense that we need good ideas, we need good thoughts, and we need good things having life within us. So the way that you protect yourself and build up your immunity and your spiritual immune system is through the probiotics of faith, through prayer, through the intercession of your guardian angels, who are the opposite of the demons, who are standing there to help you and help you keep holy and healthy. Through the practice of virtues, which is spiritual exercise. Just as you need to get out and exercise physically to be healthy, you need to spiritually exercise the virtues to be spiritually healthy. But the worst situation, which becomes very dangerous for us, is when we become cancerous. And that is, not only have we accepted these ideas and given them a place to live in us, but in fact our own cells have begun essentially to mutate against us. The idea of cancer. And spiritually that happens when we begin to turn against our very selves. And we begin to mutate. And then, guess what happens? Then we really do almost change our nature. We become mutated. We become less than human. The good news is that that's still not inherent to us. That's still an invasion, and it still can be cast out of us. It still can go into remission, so to speak, and it still can be cleansed from us. Notice, for example, those who suffer a passion so much that it becomes that way, like an addict, for example, will always be an addict. That is to say, they cannot just go back to drinking regularly if they're alcoholic, or eating regularly if they're a foodaholic or overeater. Okay? They will always have to be very, very careful to avoid those things because they can fall right back into the same passion. Just like somebody who has cancer, even if it is in remission for the rest of their life, they're watching vigilantly to make sure that they don't do anything that's going to trigger that cancer to return. Somebody who survives lung cancer is not going to say, well, that was great, give me a pack of smokes. Spiritually, we have to be very careful the same way. If something like that has gotten into us to the point that it has really distorted us in the past, and we've been set free from it, doesn't mean that we can go back to the way we were. So brothers and sisters, let us remember what Hebrews chapter 2 tells us, why Christ died for us. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he, Christ himself, likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Thus we see the man in this gospel today is a beautiful image of that truth. He had been completely subverted by the devil. He had become no longer a human being in the conventional sense. He could no longer be trusted in human society. They would bind him with chains, and he was so violent, he would break free and run into the wilderness. And when Christ found him, where was he living? In a tomb for dead people. He is the image of a human being that has been completely enslaved by the power of the evil one. And Christ sets him free from the power of the devil. And by his death, he sets all of humankind free from the power of the devil. Has he done this for you? Have you yet realized this truth in your life? If you have, you want Christ to remain with you, just like the man in the gospel. You welcome him, you desire him. But what does Christ say to you? Go and tell the world what God has done for you. Do not keep the cure to yourself. Do not keep the means of being healthy and free a secret. Share it with others. And if you find somebody who's still sick and they just can't seem to get over it, and they think they're stuck that way, and that they'll never get better, encourage them and tell them and share them. It's not true. Christ has the power to set you free. But you've got to stop feeding the sickness and start feeding your cure. In Christ Jesus. Amen. Christ is among us.